You are now live.
We are now live. Committee, this is our favorite bill, 437. We have the upgraded tax credit in the housing bill that we looked at yesterday, and we will be voting out tomorrow. I see people here, but I know Mr. Tucker got to testify. Will Baker, I'm sure, is here from the tax department. Chris Kerrigan, I don't think you got to testify the last time we took this up. Am I correct?
You are correct, Madam Chair.
Okay, then we will give you a chance to testify.
Thank you very much. Chair Cummings and honorable committee members, my name is Chris Kerrigan, and I serve as the Vice President of Business Development with the statewide Vermont Chamber of Commerce. In my role, I manage our manufacturing division, Manufacturing Council, and also the Vermont Chambers Manufacturing and Aerospace and Aviation Association. I also serve on the Governor's Aviation Council. The Vermont Chamber of Commerce strongly supports the proposal in Bill H437 to include machinery and equipment used as an integral or essential part of an integrated production operation, moving away from the direct use standard to an integrated plan that makes tax-exempt the use tax for ancillary processes, packaging, testing, and quality assurance is important for three key reasons, including modernization of Vermont's tax law, workforce recruitment and retention through upskilling, and modernization of facilities. Regarding modernization of Vermont's tax law, this change and expansion will reduce complexity, clarify tax law to enable our Vermont manufacturers to achieve greater compliance with the Vermont Department of Taxes and reduce the number of costly audits and lawsuits. As mentioned by the Vermont Department of Taxes in the House Committee on Ways and Means, many of our small Vermont manufacturers do not have use and sales tax expertise. Importantly, this change will modernize and align Vermont's tax law with the 33 other states that have similar exemptions in place. Regarding workforce recruitment, retention, and upskilling, Vermont employers have seen more employees reach retirement age and fewer students graduating from our schools for years now. And as a result, they now face a very severe workforce labor shortage. This has been exacerbated in 2021 to 2022 by the Great Reshuffle, the Great Resignation, and the Great Retirement. The Vermont Futures Project identified that Vermont needed 10,000 workers in the labor force before the pandemic. That number has increased. We now have 30,000 job openings, and even with investment workforce training programs, we do not have enough people to fill the number of open positions. The Vermont Chamber Manufacturing Council, which I manage, consisting of Vermont-based manufacturing businesses from across the state, have described the significant barriers they face in recruiting and retaining workforce to meet market demands. Higher wages and expansive benefit and incentive packages are just not enough to bring people into the field. Upgrades in machinery and equipment, however, are opportunities for these employers to upskill the current workforce, what we currently have, and increase productivity to meet new customer demands and grow in Vermont. Expanding the manufacturing tax exemption will help empower our manufacturers to reinvest in both workforce recruitment and, most importantly, retention through retraining and upskilling their current workforce. To illustrate the benefits of the expansion, and after consulting their tax departments and CPAs, Sonex Transmission Systems in Bellows Falls, Vermont, would reinvest $15,000 in workforce recruitment and equipment. West Rock and Sheldon Springs, Vermont, would reinvest $19,000 in workforce recruitment and equipment. And any cost expenditure related to the expansion and making this change would be recovered with revenue by retaining and upskilling our current workforce and growing Vermont's existing tax base. Regarding modernization of facilities, this exemption will incentivize manufacturers to further invest in testing, inspection, and quality assurance measures, not only for their products, but for their customers and supply chain partners throughout the supply chain. Twin Craft Skincare in Winooski and Essex Junction, Vermont, for example, would reinvest between $50,000 and $100,000 in wastewater treatment infrastructure, pollution control, testing, and inspection equipment for their lab facilities. So in closing and in conclusion, manufacturing is very vital. It's an important industry and economic driver for Vermont's economy. It's near and dear to my heart. With this proposal, we have an opportunity to modernize Vermont's tax law and empower our manufacturers really to reinvest in critical workforce retention, which we really need to do right now through the retraining and upskilling of the current workforce, especially during a severe workforce labor shortage. So for these reasons, the Vermont Chamber of Commerce strongly supports the expansion of the manufacturing tax exemption. And I thank you for your time and consideration, and I'm happy to answer any questions that you might have.
Okay, any questions for Mr. Kerrigan? Okay. Mr. Kerrigan, can you say a little bit about the relative size of our manufacturing?
Sure. Yep.
I know the Chamber has done a great deal with custom machine tooling, I think, at the airport. Some very innovative things there.
Yeah, actually, I'd love to share some good news. So when Senator Leahy brought back earmarks, the Vermont Chamber wrote an earmark application for the Burlington Technical Training Center, and it was a $10 million earmark for a brand new Vermont Aviation Technical Training Center, which was just included and approved in the $1.5 trillion government spending budget bill. And so we're going to be able to train and we're trained maintenance, repair, and overhaul technicians, pilots, cabin crew, and most importantly, we'll be able to recruit out-of-state students to Vermont, train them, and then source them to our manufacturers.
Okay.
But just to get, to give you some size of the employee size, West Rock and Sheldon, Vermont, they have 146 employees. Sonics down in Bellows Falls, they have 148 employees. Twincraft has about 330 employees.
Okay, not large.
Yeah, they're small and medium size.
Okay, committee, any questions? Senator Gray.
Thanks, Mr. Kerrigan. So makes sense to me to make it easier to use tax credits related to lines where, especially if there are pieces of equipment that move in and out of a line, and not every assembly line, it seems these days, is always static. But I'm wondering about that in terms of the credits for doing recruitment, and why would we just consider that a normal part of business operations?
Yep. So it's so because it's so difficult right now. I just had a manufacturing council meeting, and our manufacturers from all the way from Bennington to Newport, because it's well represented, they cannot find workers right now. And they are bending over backwards with retention strategies. So they are providing, merit increases, wage increases. They're offering flexible schedules, flexible shifts. They're offering additional benefits. You want pet insurance? We'll give you pet insurance as long as you stay with us. They're even considering busing kids, to schools in order to get the parents to come to work. So the workforce labor shortage right now is dire. We're even looking to recruit, for the Vermont Chamber, and most of the candidates that we're dealing with want, for example, $100,000 baseline salary plus benefits. Then they want to work remote. And on top of that, they want to work a 4-day work week. And that's just not feasible for a nonprofit. And I can't imagine it's even more challenging for manufacturing.
Okay, but this tax credit is not a credit. This isn't saying that we are not taxing that ancillary equipment that is important or vital to the production of an end product, but doesn't directly have its hands on the production. So the example that was given to us is the machinery that clears the beer vat between different groups. You gotta clean it, but that machinery doesn't actually take part in the manufacturing. All the rest of it is the world you're living in, but that's not what this might free up some money if they're thinking of buying new equipment.
Right, and as long as the ancillary process is part of that integrated manufacturing operation, and it's tax exempt, if it becomes law, that will provide savings, which will allow the manufacturers to reinvest in workforce recruitment, retention, new equipment and machinery. Maybe it's for technology for cybersecurity compliance. And then, of course, it will make us more competitive with the 33 other states that have similar tax exemptions already in place.
Okay, I've got Senator Sorokin and then Senator Brock.
Thank you, Chris. So I was just reading the bill and I heard your list of things that you would do with the money, with the savings, but is there any requirement that you do that with the savings?
I guess I don't understand your question, Senator Sorokin.
When I was listening to your testimony, I heard all these really nice things that TwinCraft and other companies could do with their tax savings.
Right.
Then I looked at the bill to see if there was any requirement that they spend that money that way.
No, I'm not aware of any requirement for them to spend the money that way.
Or anyway.
Yeah, no, the testimony we've heard is that this is difficult to define, that we've lost several court cases because the judge says a reasonable person could disagree with the tax department. It's not a bright line, and the tax department is saying, we only pick these up on audits. This is not an ongoing. This is, do you pay a sales tax when you buy manufacturing equipment that doesn't directly touch a product, but may.
It's not manufacturing.
It doesn't touch the manufacturing, but it may clean the conveyor belt. It may be the X-ray machine that does make sure you don't have bone chips in your sausage. It's quality assurance, cleaning. It's probably the vacuum that keeps the white granite dust from making people sick, or wood chips or wood dust. It's that. And what they do with the money, some company, if you're going to buy a lot of equipment, this might help. I don't think most companies regularly buy a whole lot of new manufacturing equipment, not unless they're making money, or they might buy it because it's more energy efficient, which we would like, but I don't want us to get
They get reimbursed for
sidetracked.
that stuff, Madam Chair. It's more energy efficient. It's
Depending
reimbursed.
on the energy.
Yes.
Okay, and we do have a fiscal note from Graham on this one. I'm getting very sensitive to fiscal notes.
This is all we have for.
I thought, yes, this is the ed fund. So this is money that would be going into the ed fund. It's sales tax. And let's see. Property transfer, which we'll look at next, it's 0.9 million. So if we have a boom, I think we might round that to $1 million, Graham. But it's, on the other hand, the property transfer surcharge, at least as long as the boom in housing is going to raise 2.8, and then it's going to decline. I think we're assuming that the housing market will cool off, because it does. Senator Brock.
With regard to the manufacturing tax credit, this is a question both for Chris and also for Graham. Is the increased efficiency of the process of identifying what is to be taxed and how, is that likely to improve compliance, tax compliance for companies because they can understand what it is they have to do? And would it potentially have any lowering cost impact on the tax department by reducing the amount of audit necessary in order to ensure compliance?
Yes, the answer is yes. And so this bill proposes including making tax exempt some ancillary packaging, inspection, and quality assurance. And if the manufacturer knows that that is included as part of the integrated manufacturing production operation, then that's going to make it easier for the Vermont Department of Taxes as well. I just worked with a manufacturer in Addison County, and they went through a lengthy, very complex audit, 4-month audit with the tax department. And this would streamline a lot of things and, of course, make it more transparent, reduce the lawsuits, make it less costly, and allow the manufacturers to focus on what they do best.
Okay.
Graham, did you look at all at any improvement in potential tax compliance because of the lack of the reduction in the amount of complexity to the taxpayer, and also efficiency in the amount of audit time that would be freed up for the tax department that might result in additional collections?
So on the first part, for the record, Graham Campbell from the Joint Fiscal Office, on the first part, increased tax compliance. As I noted at last time I was in the committee speaking about this, the fiscal estimate for this, the way this was done was the money that we get from this is primarily from audits. So when you're a manufacturer, typically it's not like a consumer where you buy something and the business that you're buying from knows to collect the sales tax from you. Well, the way it usually works is because these manufacturers are buying, very specialty equipment, they buy the piece of equipment and then they have to make the call based upon the law and the regulations, whether the sales tax applies, and then they remit use tax. And so the majority of the revenue that's been collected from, this, I guess you could say, lack of exemption comes from when the tax department has come in after the fact and found that a manufacturer owes use tax. And so to the extent that improving the process might benefit tax compliance, I'm not sure you would see more manufacturers paying more sales tax as a result of this. So, because I think manufacturers are doing, the best they can to follow the sales tax law, and the money that comes in for this is mostly from audits. And so that's where this estimate comes from. The increase or the change in administrative costs, I think is a good point. I remember when I talked to the tax department about this last year, is that it would certainly make their lives easier, but it's not as if the audit staff that works on, corporations or for, in general audits, that they would sort of, they would get redeployed elsewhere within the department. And so it's not necessarily as though we would be saving money on, or at least bookable revenues per se, on reduced audit costs or reduced administration costs of the department. Although I think generally the tax department has spoken and say this is an administration proposal, and they have said that it would sort of make their lives a little bit easier.
Well, what I was thinking is, what I heard was that in some cases judges are saying it's difficult because the taxation process is somewhat ambiguous as to what is and what is not included, and so I get the sense that we're losing some of these cases. And if that's the case, the question would be, could the auditors, were they concentrating on things that had a higher likelihood of success, in effect increase the amount of audit revenue that we get that would partially offset what we would theoretically, quote, lose by this? I
think that's a totally fair assumption. I just don't have information from the tax department that's definitively said that their audit staff would be working on, I guess, higher efficiency.
I mean, I wouldn't assume they'd be sitting around.
I think the other thing too is that the tax department, when this proposal was put forward, they assumed a revenue loss very similar to this, and so to the extent that they were not booking that revenue as a savings to their budget at all, sort of told me that while possible, it's not something that we are counting as a cost savings within the tax department's budget.
Madam Chair.
I think when you go to court and you lose, you have to pay it back. What is been paid in has to get paid back with interest, and I believe we equalize that interest. We have to pay what we charge in interest. I'm assuming that there are other costs. I don't know if we have to get outside attorneys or consultants, but going to court has a cost too. Senator McDonald.
Graham, what percentage of the cases does the state tax department win, and what percentage does it lose?
I don't know that information. That would be a question for the tax department.
Okay. So
Is it all cases or just these cases?
is there any other information that you've been given that you're not sure of? Madam Chair,
Yes.
a question for the witness from the chamber whose name I forgot.
Karen.
Chris.
Karen.
Thank you. A very skillful and well thought presentation. And I wanted to ask a question having to do with a little bit with the history of this issue. There has been a move by manufacturers, a wise and thoughtful move to replace individuals with machines. And in doing so, some of the machines blend manufacturing elements and packaging elements or cleaning elements or things that are not manufacturing. So some of it is taxable and some of it is not taxable. The owners of the manufacturing process self-audit. And I would like to know, when there are disagreements between the tax department and the company, what the ratio is of wins and losses. And I would hope we could get that. But it is not in the interests of, it's in the interests of the manufacturers to find a way not to have to pay taxes on any of this stuff. That is a benefit to them. And if the more times they are audited, then they have more opportunities to come in here and tell us that the system is burdensome and troublesome and they don't have to pay these taxes. They go to our ed fund. And it would be, for the witness, would it be equally as simple to tax it from the beginning of the machine to the end of the machine and limit the audits and simply pay the tax on the whole darn machine and not have to use your best judgment on what percentage was one and what percentage was the other?
I think a simple yes or no answer would be sufficient.
Yeah, I would say no to that because it would put us at a further disadvantage, competitive disadvantage, again, with the 33 other states that have similar tax exemptions. And just to, mention the automation, there's been some concern about automation taking jobs away. Well, automation is not taking jobs away from anyone that wants a job. Again, we don't have enough workforce and we've got 30,000 job openings and we don't have enough people to fill those jobs.
All of which, that's a problem you got to deal with. Our problem is raising revenues. And would it be equally as simple from a revenue point of view and from avoiding audits and from winning and losing cases? Would it be simple, just as simple, to tax it from the beginning of the machine to the end of the machine, period?
Again, my answer is no, because it would not make us competitive with the other 33 states that have similar tax exemptions.
What the senator is asking is, would it be as simple? And I think a yes or no on simple only is what he's looking for. And then I'm gonna leave it to him to make the motion.
So your question
Don't
again.
have to answer.
Yeah, I think I did answer it by saying no to the taxing the entire process.
The senator does use the Socratic method on occasion.
Yep.
Okay.
You've got my answer.
So, Madam Chair,
Yes.
I've watched the state listen to the business community and make accommodations, eliminating the machinery and equipment tax, which is an annual tax, and getting down just to the taxes on machines that don't do manufacturing. And maybe I'm too cynical, but I would say if I were in the position of having machines that did a little of this, a little of that, and I had to self-audit, I'd make it work in my favor. And when I had to go to court, if I lost, my solution would be, don't tax any of it. And in each case, the incentive is to cut it as narrow as you can, and the worst that can happen is you get audited, and then you convince the legislature, don't tax any of it. And that's it's our job, if that were to happen, to say no to your request. So.
Okay, and if you make that motion, I'll vote for it, provided you add all the tax credits that we give to farming equipment and cannabis growers as of the other day. And remember the veterinary supplies that weren't taxed for farmers and mulch. It is not just manufacturing that gets tax breaks from the state.
Madam Chair, you are correct. And each time we look at taxes that are collected on the business side, we find a reason to not collect it. And each time we look to fund senior citizens, poor people, people who pay their school taxes based on income, raise taxes to fill those areas. Raise new taxes, the answer is no new taxes. But the old taxes, we can cut away at them here, we can drop them there, we can no longer collect them for all sorts of reasons. But when it comes to fill in the gaps, when we go to fill them, the answer is no, no, no. It seems to be a one-way street.
Okay, there is a request. This committee has decided nothing. There is also a request to raise the property transfer tax surcharge. I believe on homes and business transfer of real property over $1 million. And Abby, am I correct in that?
Yes, Madam Chair. So it's for the record, Abby Shepherd, Office of Legislative Counsel. It is deeded real property. So it does not in this version apply to controlling interests.
Right. So it would be the ski areas, but it would be if I sell my manufacturing business or I sell my warehouse, my lumber company just changed that $1 million in a business is not exceptionally large as it is in a home. This covers both. And this, Senator, is a proposal to raise taxes on rich people, significantly more than we're refunding them on the manufacturing tax credit. If you look at the numbers, I don't like this one, but Senator Bray.
I'm not sure who this question should go to, maybe Mr. Baker, as they're doing enforcement on tax law and audits, et cetera. But my question is, does the language that's being offered now, to what degree does it draw a brighter, clearer line that we won't subsequently hear? We won't have the same sort of conversation again, because someone will say it's still murky and they're still doing audits and they're still going to court. Are we establishing a bright enough line to, at least if we were to agree, that at least we might simplify what happens?
Okay, Mr. Baker, do you want to try that one? This is going to give you a clear line so that the company that does not have a 10-person accounting department, but maybe just the bookkeeper, will understand. Is this going to do that for you?
Thank you, Madam Chair. This is Will Baker, Assistant Attorney General at the Tax Department. So I understand the question, we're back to sales tax discussion, is that right?
And back to the manufacturing, yes, sales tax.
Okay.
Yes.
Yes, we believe that this proposal as drafted provides a clearer line to the exemption. In sales tax, if I could just step back a minute and talk about sort of sales tax generally, the exemptions are always the trickiest part. The exemptions are always where the appeals are and the litigation is. Applying 6% to a sales price is a pretty easy thing to do. It's all about what's in and out of the tax base. And with our several exemptions, that's where the tricky parts are. So for sales tax, the generally understood theory for sales tax is, generally speaking, that the intention is to tax the final user. It's a consumption tax on the final buyer of a product. And for that reason, all states, or nearly all states, have a set of exemptions that are designed to strip out business inputs from the sales tax as exemptions, because we don't want to pyramid tax on top of tax on top of tax while products are being made. And so there are several, the manufacturing exemption is one example. The resale exemption is a big example. Packaging exemption, those sorts of things. So the intention is to apply sales tax only once, and as the product moves along and is manufactured and enhanced and sold, that's going to be the final highest value of that product, and that's when it's taxed. Now, no state has an absolutely pure sales tax in this regard. Business inputs are taxed, and they're taxed substantially, particularly in states like Vermont and many other states. But that is the general intention, and that's the intention of the manufacturing exemption in state law across the country. I just want to talk about the legal scholarship of the manufacturing exemption a little bit. Generally, there are sort of two camps. They're not tightly defined. Each state's definition is a little bit different, but generally speaking, there are two approaches. This direct approach, which is the current Vermont law, which exempts the equipment and machinery that acts on the product as it's being manufactured, and not other things unless otherwise stated. And then there's this what some states call a total plant theory, which is that if you are a manufacturer and you make stuff, then it is all exempt. And if you remember that flow chart that I had last week, it would be the blue stuff on top, it's all exempt. Cow to truck pulling away from the loading dock with the final product. That is not what we're proposing here. We're proposing to make clear lines within the manufacturing process, so that if you're within that manufacturing process, the part where the raw materials are added and first acted upon to placement in initial packaging, everything in there would be exempt, including these ancillary processes like cleaning and quality control. We don't think it's a particular, if you look at that chart and all the products that are taxed or exempted under current law, there aren't really that many changes. It's really cleaning, quality assurance, inspection, and machinery that puts the product into secondary packaging. Although sometimes the product that puts the machinery that does the packaging for initial and secondary packaging is the same thing. So really it's three discrete changes within the sales tax law here. And you know, I can't say that a lot, I don't know if states have moved from the direct test to the total plant theory test as a result of cumbersome appeals or challenging litigation or confusion. Frankly, I suspect a lot of it is probably economic development reasons. I know that there's usually specific economic development incentives built in, which we do not have in Vermont. Things like, you know, if you locate a plant here and you build a plant worth $5 million or greater, we will exempt everything that you need to build the plant and operate the plant. That's not what we have, and that's not what is being proposed. But what the tax department has looked at here is the legal challenges associated with applying the current law to manufacturers and the subjective nature of this integrated and synchronized test. And if I could just read.
Mr. Baker.
Sure.
So thank you for that. That's helpful. And I'm going to ask you to speculate, and so you can say, well, I can't do that. But to what degree, if we make this change, do you imagine that in a year or two, we might be back at this table to further amend the boundaries or define the boundaries? Or are you reasonably confident that we're sort of getting almost all of it through this bill? Or are we, this chapter 7 of 14 chapters?
Yeah, that's a good question. And I'm confident that the proposal here is addressing the concerns that we've seen over the last 15 or 20 years. These are the gray areas. There's one big gray area, that's the integrated test. That's the brown writing on that handout that I provided last week. That's the big one. The two additional changes having to do with quality control and secondary packaging were added into the proposal because those were the other big challenges that we've seen. We haven't seen big gray areas in this manufacturing sales tax application. To my knowledge, these are the gray areas. You are right that when you expand, when you draw a line, and that's what tax law is all about. When you draw a line, you draw it at a certain place, and you'll always have people who fall just under the line, and you always have people that fall just above the line, and they're often sympathetic cases. So you are right that a sales tax exemption has bookmarks or bookends, the beginning and the end of the exemption, and they'll always be there, and there'll always be people that fall on either side of it. So I do appreciate that concern, and that is what keeps tax auditors in business, frankly. But I am confident that we have addressed the complexities and the challenges that we've seen in the last several years. I'm not aware of any in this area that we don't address by this language.
Thanks very much.
Okay, committee.
Madam Chair?
Yes.
the witness makes what appears to be a logical argument, and that Mr. Baker does. And he talks about a gray area and where the tension is between what is taxable and what isn't, and how that area is contested. Madam Chair, when you have contracts between labor and unions, it is expected that that gray area be litigated over and over again. And if it is not, it is considered a bad contract because one side is not participating. So I got this chart for the committee. One side is taxable and one side isn't. And the argument is that this gray area, these two things shouldn't be separate, that they're causing problems in litigation. And the solution is to say that we're just going to take this untaxable thing and make it the whole thing. It'll be one way or the other. We all understand. So now, if you do that and you make it all yellow, not taxed, it's solid, is it not?
Yeah.
So next week, you get the new machine, and the new machine is longer than the old one, and suddenly the new machine looks like this. And you go, where did that come from? Well, that may be, in this case, non-taxable stuff. Or you may have a company come in and make the machine longer this way. And those are two completely different machines. And when the company adds something onto them and makes it longer, this is a longer machine with more of one side than ever existed before, you're right back to the tax department how did you guys add that stuff on there? Well, we bought a machine that was longer, we added it on there, and it wasn't taxable, and the whole damn thing isn't taxable, so we don't have to pay tax on any of it. It's not gonna go away because you've dealt with this gray area here. Anybody, accountant, any reasonable person, any eighth grader, any person like myself is gonna figure out how you simply add more onto the machine and then claim it isn't taxable. It's not gonna go away.
Okay, Senator Pearson and then Senator Bray, and questions to the witnesses, then I'm gonna do a straw poll, move us on to committee discussion, because we have one other section.
Thank you for your patience, Madam Chair.
You're welcome.
My question was just, are you anticipating voting on this today?
No, this is an H bill, but again, in light of the budgetary needs, I am being asked, what are we going to do? We already have the manufactured homes in another bill, which we haven't done either. But this one, we lose a little. The next one, we gain a little. I don't think anybody likes all of them.
The property transfer, does that go to the general fund? I believe.
Yes, I believe property transfer
So part
does.
of this bill.
There's a certain amount that comes off the top to pay the housing bond.
Right. But so this is a potentially up for the general fund and a down for the ed fund. Okay, thank you. I just wanted to understand that. Yeah.
Senator Bray.
Well, we haven't heard from Mr. Tucker. I don't know if we're gonna talk about that.
Mr. Tucker testified last time, so he's here. If you have a specific question, you can ask him. I'm trying not to get this into a dueling witnesses situation.
Okay, no, I just didn't know if he was here to present any additional information.
I will ask him that when we get to that topic. I'm trying to get a sense as to where we are on the manufacturing. And what.
You might need that across
Yeah,
the
he's
hall.
across the hall. Thank you.
I guess, I don't know if any of our witnesses have an answer, but I'm sympathetic to the fact that this is difficult to administer. It's not simple. I'm sympathetic to that. I'm not sympathetic really to us taking the revenue hit at this moment, because if it's clunky, it's been clunky for a long time. And so I guess I'm wondering if anyone at tax or elsewhere of our witnesses have an idea of if we wanted to address the complexity, is there an offsetting source that would balance out the bottom line that anybody's considered?
Well, the tax that we're talking about regarding the surcharge on the property transfer tax, the dollar amount exceeds it, but we're talking about two different funds, but nonetheless, money is money. And
well, I mean, I would be looking for something more from the same sources, but anyway.
So one of the problems with this particular tax,
if you don't mind, Senator Brower, to see if any of the witnesses have thoughts on that, Mr. Baker or others.
Yeah, this started as our attempt to rework the language in the manufacturing exemption to make it clearer. It's not a, it wasn't created as a kind of sales tax package where there was some up and down, like kind of like the corporate proposals that you've been looking at. This isn't a package of proposals. We thought of this more as a technical change than anything else. And I appreciate the JFO's work on this. The revenue amount was at least surprising to me, because we do suspect that this exemption that we're talking about is really policed by audit and not by voluntary compliance. And voluntary compliance is something like 96 or 97% of our operation. So anyway, we thought about this more along the lines of a technical fix and not as a package of package of proposals.
If I could just add two things. The first is I think there are several things that you could do to raise approximately $1 million in the sales tax, but they would either involve, getting rid of some exemption or changing some exemption slightly. And I have not thought about those in specific. The only thing I'll also add, just for context for the committee, is that, in the current, yield modeling for the education fund that we've been doing this year, it's about $9.5 million for every penny on the homestead, the average homestead and the average non-homestead property tax rate. So a reduction of $900,000 is, I think, barely noticeable on the tax rate. And I can say that in the House bill that just passed, the yield bill, this construct isn't even considered in the yield model because it was relatively small. So that's the only other thing that I would add to the discussion about offsetting revenues, because absent the committee not doing anything to cover this, then more or less property taxpayers will pick it up. Each one will pay a tiny bit more on their property taxes.
Okay, if I could just follow up. So Graham, you said you were confident that taxpayers in this case of the manufacturing sales tax were complying, and Mr. Baker said he's pretty sure it's only folks who are complying after an audit. So Graham, do you have any reason to believe, to back up what you're saying, that people are complying? That seems directly opposed from the folks at tax.
Sorry, I think I misspoke. I think I think what I meant is more of a general comment that I think manufacturers do the best they possibly can to comply with sales tax laws. I don't know about specifically on this item, but again, we're talking about use tax, and audits is probably where we get this from. So our estimate comes from audits, but there's also a small assumption. This is the reason why our estimate was higher than taxes, is that we assume that there is a level of voluntary compliance happening on this that we would in effect lose. And so that's why our estimate is, I think this tax estimate was 750,000, our estimate's 900,000, and that's just for the group of manufacturers who are voluntarily paying use tax on this. We're just unable to discern from the use tax return whether it is a manufactured input from the direct process that's being exempted, or whether it's manufacturing inputs in general that are already exempt.
Thank you.
Senator Burr.
This is a question for Mr. Baker. I'm wondering if there's any kind of silver lining to any of this. If we clarify the law so that there's less time and fewer instances where you're out having to audit in order to clarify where the lines are drawn on the manufacturer side, does that free up staff to do some other useful activity? And does any of that activity lead to increased revenues? I mean, I know there's always money out there that's unremitted that you all have to sort of chase down. So I'm just wondering if there might be other income that would come in that might offset some of the tax loss because we're taxing less of the line.
Thank you. Yes, I do believe that's true. Our sales tax auditors like to identify a sure thing. They like when they assess a tax, they like it to stick. They don't want to have the audit appealed to administrative hearing and then court and then have it zeroed out. So that's the premise that from which they like to operate. And so there are countless areas where we're more or less sure that it's a sure thing, and we can focus on those areas. Furthermore, this precise work that we're talking about right here is probably some of the most time-consuming work that we do because it has to be done on site. These days, doing a corporate audit or even a sales tax audit, it's often an exercise in Excel sheets. But in this particular, when an auditor is looking at something like this, the auditor has to walk the manufacturer's floor to understand what each of these purchases were during the audit period and how they function at the plant and what they do, so that they can do an assessment about whether it was properly exempted or not. And so they have to be on site, which has been particularly difficult during the pandemic. But still, at any point, going there, being on site, that's a time commitment for an auditor, and they have to walk through the whole plant and understand the whole process, which is pointed out in the legal scholarship about the total plant theory and why the direct test that we have now can be such a problem, because they have to do this for each and every taxpayer. Each manufacturer is different, and they have to do the analysis for each piece of equipment separately. And so I do think that the opportunity costs here are substantial, and the auditors could be focusing on work that's more of a sure thing. And if I could just make one more comment to Senator Pearson's question and then Mr. Campbell's response, maybe I can help clarify the point here. Manufacturers pay lots of use tax, and they know that they must pay lots of use tax. That's not when I say this is difficult, it's hard for manufacturers to know, and we're only catching this on audit. I'm not talking about use tax generally. What I didn't put, and maybe I should have, in my assembly line handout is everything that's taxable, which is, even at a manufacturing plant, you'll have you'll have the manufacturing floor, and that's really what we're talking about here. But you also have all the administrative offices. You have all their sales staff. You have all their technical IT, HR offices, heating, general heating for the whole plant, the assembly line, and the administrative offices. Printers, computers, all those sorts of things. That's all taxable, and they know that it's all taxable. And so they accrue use tax on those sorts of things every day. What they believe, I think, is that the administrative stuff is over here and the assembly line is over there. This is taxable and that's exempt, which generally speaking is correct. But with this integrated and synchronized test, there'll be certain things that are out on the manufacturing floor that are taxable. And that's where they get tripped up. And that is what this proposal seeks to clarify. And so when, Mr. Campbell's absolutely right that this is about use tax, and they do accrue use tax, and they do that every day, and they know they need to do that. But what we're talking about here is the few items that they purchase that have a really complex analysis that needs to be done. And that's what those state tax auditors are good at looking for and identifying and taxing. And then we're off to the races in the appeal, in the audit, and then the appeal.
So thank you for that. May I follow with Mr. Campbell just briefly? So,
Yeah.
Mr. Campbell, did you have a chance to capture that sort of secondary effect, the opportunity cost of going, auditing on sure audits that are more likely to yield tax revenue? I know that's kind of seems speculative, but I don't know if it's in your figuring in any way.
It was not. No, I don't doubt that that's an effect that could happen, but we don't have any firm information to say that the auditors on these cases will move to more, I guess, revenue efficient audit cases. And so that's not something that we would feel comfortable booking and did not book for this estimate.
Thanks.
Okay, Senator Pearson.
My question might be for Abby or for Mr. Baker. I remember in Burlington recently, we repealed the equipment property tax. And I don't know if that also seemed cumbersome and tricky. Like restaurants used to pay property value for like tables and kitchen equipment and whatever. Was that ever a statewide thing, or was that just a municipality?
Anybody know?
I don't know the history of it. It is under current law. I think it's an opt-out. I'm just looking for that section right now. I don't know if Will knows the legislative history on that offhand, though.
Is this business personal property? Is that the?
Yeah.
Business personal property is not subject to statewide education tax. It might be subject to municipal, property tax. But like Ms. Shepherd said, the municipalities can opt out of that. And that change happened in 1991. So that the ability for the towns to opt out was put in 1991. So that was well before Act 60. So that wasn't something that came in with the statewide education tax. That was at a time when towns had a more direct link to their school district.
So in those days, that property tax would have also applied to help support schools.
Before 1991.
Yeah. Thank you. I do wonder, and is when we made that shift, does that correlate to when this sales tax started being applied, or has that always been true?
No, we have a standard manufacturing exemption, in our law, and that's been there since the beginning of sales tax, I believe, which was either like 1967 or 1969, something like that.
Thank you.
I used to pay an inventory tax on every ball of yarn that I had, and it was a pain to count them all.
Yep.
And it was very hard to verify. I don't know who would be able to come in and give me a value on 3/4 of an ounce of, so.
Question for Mr. Baker. I'm looking and I'm struck by the chart that you used, the flow chart for dried milk production. Is it fair to say that you could have two manufacturers of the same product, one of which would be fully taxed and one of which would not, or one of which would have tax exemptions and one would not, even though they're effectively making the same product? Just because of the difference in their production process as to whether or not it was a synchronized process.
Yes, that's the test we have under current law. That is true. If based on how they conduct their manufacturing, I would say that the older the manufacturing process is, the probably less integrated and synchronized it is. In other words, they when they print newspapers, you know, between printings, they used to actually have big cotton bats and they would swab the ink off the presses between runs. And I'm sure that if you were to set up a newspaper printing operation today, that would probably all be electronically done and fully integrated. In fact, the latest court case we had on this, and this is public because it went to court. The latest court case we had on this was a very new Vermont beer manufacturer. And they had purchased very, very fancy brewing equipment from Austria that was totally computer controlled, including the cleaning and some of these ancillary things. Whereas I imagine if you were using 100-year-old beer making equipment, you would brew the beer and then have to figure out manually how to clean the steel tanks in between batches. So it's probably fair to say that the more modern the system is, the more integrated and synchronized it is, and the older it is, maybe the less so. But you're right. If two manufacturers could be making the exact same thing, and based on the methods and the equipment they had, the tax treatment might be different.
Thank you.
Okay, committee. On this one, how are we leaning? This is an H bill, and given what we've heard on revenues, I'm not going to put it out, but I like, as we did with the last two big bills, waiting in corporate, get a sense that we've reached some agreement. I think we know where Senator McDonald stands.
I'm not sure I could today.
You're not so sure, all right. I guess maybe I'm just more attuned to him. The rest of us, how are we leaning on this one? And then we'll go on to the next one.
So, I am supportive of the change.
I'm fine with it. I would prefer that it be in a larger package where we have some revenue.
Well, we do, that this was finally drafted.
Well, if this is this is ed fund and
Yeah,
that is
it's
general
not
fund,
that
so,
finely. I think it was more finely crafted to avoid a veto.
yeah. Too.
Well, this is the way, I have real misgivings about it. So I'm glad we're not voting today.
No, we're not voting today. Okay, Senator Brock,
I'm in favor of the bill. I'm in favor of the bill for a variety of reasons. One, I think it puts our tax law in this area in line with that the majority of the states by far. 33 states are doing this, and it's sort of the increasing trend like Joyce Definigan and so on and so forth that we're seeing elsewhere. That's one. Two, I think we have a situation right now that's fundamentally unfair. You can have two manufacturers making the same product, but because of the nature of their process, they're taxed differently, which I don't think is fundamentally fair. I think that in any case, the taxation, the way we do it now, again, depending on the manufacturer, actually encourages people to be less labor intensive. And so that notion that I think someone mentioned here that, about the people involved in the process, the fewer the people, the more likely the process is automated and the less likely it would be to collect a tax in the first place. I like the notion of having tax auditors audit things that are actually going to be productive and produce additional revenue. Tax revenue from auditing is a critically important thing to pick up taxes that we're not otherwise going to collect. But when they're auditing things that are the likelihood of the audit success is questionable, that's not a good use of tax department resources. So that's another factor in my mind. So on the basis of that, I believe this is an exemption that makes sense. And I realize that, we confronted this with JFO before. They're not in the business of forecasting. And so often there are things, and we talked about everything from tips to a variety of things that we've talked about over the years in which we don't have a good estimate as to what the ROI is. But there is likely an ROI. I think the ROI will be from increased efficiency on the one hand, that will be used and plowed back into businesses. And you can argue how much they're going to do as opposed to keeping it for profit. That's an endless argument. But I think also the notion of getting additional revenue from more productive auditing and less labor intensive tax department time being spent on things that are not going to produce results.
And I'm leaning towards being supportive, probably because I'm the only one. Sarah McDonald, who was on this committee when we made the tax department hire 12 or 15 new auditors and sent them out to audit. And I was here when everybody from the theater in Burlington, the performing arts, it started out with the tax consultants that came in, the wedding and catering industry, and I agree, most Vermonters, business and individuals, pay their taxes. And when you get a group who thinks they have been doing their taxes correctly, and the tax department comes in and says, no, and you start seeing that consistently, and I think Mr. Baker said that the first day, when you start seeing that, there's an indication that there is a problem with your definitions, that it is not clear, because the assumption is the average person wants to comply. And so I think this is making it, and there's a cost to having to go to court and do an audit and lose. So anyway, that gets us on.
You have to keep explaining yourself, then you know there's something wrong.
Yeah. That gets.
I just wanted to acknowledge though that Senator McDonald has a very good point. If it's all in or all out, it makes it clearer.
Yes.
And that's the point I think one of the points he's trying to make. And so
No, he is.
if what we're trying to argue for is clarity, you can go the other direction too. It's so there's got to be more to it than just clarity. So
Yeah, I think so, because you could.
Yeah.
The economic development people would be all over us, but you could. Senator Bray.
Now when there's a community fundraiser, they put the thermometer up and they feel good. I'm wondering for ourselves, maybe this is because I like to do, it's helpful to me to see things. If we could do some informal thermometer over here, how much we're spending. What's that?
Revenue and
Yeah.
decrease.
Because we're gonna have a day of reckoning, and it might be
Yes, we
nice to have a stack of things to be able to look at next week.
Well, McDonald, I know you made us,
He's an
we had
artist.
some kind of flags at one point for when we were operating. You had paper plates we had to put up. It was like when we were the liquor control board locally, you had had.
EDIC and,
Yeah,
Energy efficiency, electric. energy
that's
efficiency.
right, okay.
please don't take.
Can you, no, but I was gonna say, can you, create 2 thermometers for us? Revenues and tax exemptions. And we'll,
His thermometer's a little hot today.
yes, I know, but that'll keep him busy while he's coloring. And then we can move it up and down. Okay,
But to be,
I think it's a good idea.
well, yeah, I mean, to be a little bit more serious
I'm
about
not
it.
touching that.
Across the hall, they have Stephanie who literally
Yeah.
sits there and
Yeah.
keeps track of everything
Yes.
they're doing. You know, we've all seen her do that. We don't have a staff member in here who does that. I mean, Graham, are you doing that? Keeping
Graham?
track of it all for us? Because as we're making decisions about taxes, who's got the spreadsheet? Do you?
I don't think we've asked Graham to do that.
I have a spreadsheet that I use to track revenues that I can share with the committee, sometime, but it's really tough in your guys' case because, the House often moves first, and they have certain revenues, and then it's a matter of deciding how much is available for the budget, once the budget passes the House. So in normal years, I do sort of, I think I have shared that with the committee, but this year is a little weird because you have bills that have passed the House from the first half of the biennium that, could affect your budget if you pass them. So it is a confusing scenario, but if the committee would like me to sort of come in and give an overview about what is on the table for the Senate regarding taxes and revenues, I'm more than happy to do so.
That would, I think, be helpful. Stephanie is specifically assigned to the budget,
Right.
and Graham just tells us what we're spending and what we're doing, but I think if we ask to have a running tally.
It would be really great to see all the taxes, all the tax expenditures, the things we've done so that we could get a bigger picture idea of where we're at and what we've said yes to and what we need to say no to down the road.
Because it really isn't fair to pass things out and ask a folks to be the wicked witch every year and cut good programs, so. Senator Gray.
Well, thanks, so I'm glad we'll do that, because that running total thing, when we finally have to bring them even, it'll be easier. It also begs the question in my mind of, what have we already said yes to, and how would our votes change now that we see the $40 million roughly cap as opposed to, a $98 million gap?
Yeah.
I think the one we did today is the biggest, and that's the retirees.
53, well, we did some housing credits and think and stuff, so.
Is that,
What is something?
That's 53, not on the floor.
no, we did 53 today. We decreased
Oh, you didn't vote it.
revenues.
You didn't vote it.
No, we decreased revenues by exempting pensions upstairs. Not as much as people wanted us to exempt pensions, but we had the equity argument.
That's the 5,000 the House went up on, that you're talking about the Social Security?
We passed it on the floor, that's 53 today.
Today.
That was-
We exempt.
Oh, yeah, those
yeah.
are the all other pensions, not
Yeah.
Social Security.
Yeah.
The $5,000.
No, that's still
The
sitting here with
child
the
tax.
child tax credit,
Got it. Okay.
which is the big one.
Yeah.
Those two together cost $50 million,
Right.
which is what,
So-
plus there's a few out there where the child advocate bill, Office of Child Advocate, passed the House last year, They didn't include it in last year's budget, and they didn't include it in this year's budget. And they say 300,000 the first year. Massachusetts has, is it an $8 million? Yeah, office. They're all over the board, but to do the job and to do the job well, it's gonna cost a lot more than $300,000. I think we know that, and once you start it, that's it. We'll send it in with a small price tag, but then we're already seeing it with the Office of Racial Equity. You know, she really needs more people to really do her job, and you know, it's those kinds of things that we build. Okay, I want to have a talk about the property transfer tax surcharge.
Madam Chair,
Yes,
could you deal with the amendment tomorrow, because I'm gonna take that
yes,
upstairs if
that's
we have
right.
looked at it and agreed on it.
Okay, yes, this was I think I was headed to the
Let's see,
floor
600.
when Warren Coleman came in and said, we've got an issue, and it's the placement of,
Right, it's the
Allows them to.
error in section 4 of S-269 that I mentioned on the floor. There's a line relating to an exemption that appears to apply to section 4 of the bill when it should apply to section 5 of the bill. And for simplicity's sake, we just simply did an amendment here that moved the language, which is the final sentence or the next to last sentence. Extension shall allow pilot participants to spend or contract to spend pilot funds accrued prior to January 1, 2024, but shall not allow participants to secure additional pilot funds, should be part of section 5. And what we passed out included that in section 4 by error. It's a technical error.
okay.
I'll support this, but I did note you said on the floor that it was a 7-0 vote, which is.
Yes.
Yeah, I realize I made a mistake in doing that. I apologize to Senator McDonald, even recognizing the fact that he really intended to vote yes, he just didn't do it.
Randy sent me a note, I appreciate it.
Yeah, but that was my error.
I figured you'd catch it, I caught it. I don't think we've done it.
Senator Pearson's eyebrows went up, that's how I noticed.
We caught it. I left out military survivors, and I have a large sign on my desk that says survivors, so I will put that in. Just mention that we also did that before third reading, but yeah, that was one, like, I wanted to do the amendment first because I knew I'd forget it once I got rolling through the exciting world of taxes and pensions. And I did, but that worked. Okay, property transfer tax
Okay, so
surcharge.
we're okay on this, I can pick it up?
Yeah. Okay, property transfer tax. Graham, you want to talk to us about this? Committee questions. This is pretty, it's not fudgy. If the property costs more than $1 million, you're going to pay an additional what,
0.5% on the value over $1 million transfer.
and the transfer tax now? Because we've done surcharges on that. What would be the total tax on those?
So if the committee takes a look at my fiscal note, there's a table in there. It depends on the type of property that we're transferring. But for principal residences on the value over $1 million as proposed in this bill, it would be 1.95% on the value over $1 million, because the property transfer tax is current law is 1.25% on the value over $100,000 for a principal residence. And then there is the 0.2% clean water surcharge. And so the total amount of the total tax rate on the value over $1 million would be the 1.25 plus the 0.5% surcharge proposed in this bill, plus the 0.2% clean water surcharge that's also applied to the same transfer of property. So
And when we did the surcharge, I believe Senator Sorokin and I, several years ago, tried to get that exemption raised. You don't pay the surcharge, it's $100,000. $100,000 didn't buy a very nice house probably 5 years ago, 6. Right now, $100,000. I don't think we want humans habitating in those, so that may adjust as the housing market adjusts, but that would take that away. So, Senator Bray.
I'm trying to remember, well, 2 things. One is the 0.2% surcharge for clean water. Is that also exclude the first $100,000, or is that from $1?
no, it excludes. So it depends on the type of property. But for principal residences, the first 100,000 is excluded for the clean water surcharge. It's the first 100 for the VHFA properties. It's the amount over 200,000. But for commercial, industrial, any other types of properties, the clean water surcharge applies from the first $1.
Okay. And does that surcharge end in 2027, something like that? No, it hasn't.
We did it.
We had some
It
strange.
does.
Yeah.
All right, Abby says. it
That's
does.
correct. Yes, 2027, July 1st.
Yeah.
I remember getting up on the floor, so if you think this is gonna sunset, I got a pretty.
Yeah, that's not-
It was.
that's why you want to be careful about giving exemptions.
Shenanigans.
Okay,
So to answer your straw poll, I'm interested in this concept. I wonder about making some changes if it's, I don't understand the business, the applying it to businesses, but not to deeded transfers. That seems strange. And I also wonder if we should have a higher limit if you're talking about commercial buildings. And I would be very open to playing with this $100,000 trigger that, or you know, the, but I think in general, you know, we've seen property just explode, and Vermonters are trying to figure out if they can handle financing before they put in a bid, and somebody's bought it for cash sight unseen, overbidding. I mean, I don't think this probably slows that down, but shame on us if we don't at least help our coffers on the way. So I don't see a good argument against doing something along these lines.
Senator Sorokin.
So I was a pretty strong no on this before, and if it's just the same way it is, I would remain that way, but I would be if we had the time, if we looked at raising that $100,000 and maybe, as Senator Pearson says, maybe raising when this exemption tax kicks in, then we can make it, one important thing, make it revenue neutral, because I don't think we need to raise money anymore, because I think the mobile home thing that this was designed to raise money for is likely to be taken care of in the housing bill, which is testified into.
Right, but yeah, you were here. We still need to raise money for the base budget. Remember that, yeah, so.
But I think if you, it seems to me if we play with 100,000, you're not gonna raise any money.
Well, no, but every little bit helps our thermometer, so.
I was not suggesting that we have the mansion tax kick in at a higher rate. Not at all.
It was
I kick it
business.
in at a lower rate.
Business taxes.
Yeah, they're saying everything over $1 million, you're paying a 0.5% premium. And I'm saying they include commercial properties in that. And I think that is, I'd be willing to look at something different They also exclude title transfers. Which
No,
is,
transfer of ownership, that's the ski areas. We
yeah, that's
dealt
the
with that.
last person I would exclude. I would start with them. But at any rate, the mansion tax for homes, or second homes, I think should start at a lower rate, not at over $1 million, which Senator Stratton suggested. I was wanting to move up. I wouldn't, I'm sorry. It's okay. I just wanted to be clear.
Okay. So it looks like we want to take a more in-depth look at this.
We did look at it a lot last spring, so we should, but I'm definitely interested in this. You talk to any sort of average Vermonter who's having a hard time finding a home right now, and they're seeing people from out of state do exactly what Senator Pearson just said. And they're like, why are you not trying to get revenue to help our state from the people who are coming in and buying, $1 million homes here and driving up the market so average Vermonters can't afford homes? I just don't understand
Is there any way?
why we wouldn't do this.
Is there any way of distinguishing between the price of the home and whether it's a second home, or is that too complicated?
We tried to get at this last year, and I asked the tax department to report back to us about the types of homes, a second home versus.
Yes.
Yeah, and they came back and said that they don't have that granular level of data. And that was in their report that they gave to us about also the hard to appraise properties. And they didn't really have much to say except for we don't have this data. But I also think even if it's a first home and you can afford over $1 million home, then you're doing really well, and you should be able to afford a little bit more tax on that property transfer. I mean, we're talking about people who are struggling to buy any home at all.
So
It seems crazy to me that we wouldn't try to gain some revenue from the people who can afford these really expensive homes.
And one way to help that would be, if we do this, would be to raise that house where you don't pay the surcharge.
The 100,000?
Yeah, you don't, up from 100,000. Well, we were trying for 200, Michael, maybe we'll go for 250, which is supposedly the home that your average Vermont $100,000.
I would be fine with that, but we need
I'd like to look at it.
Yeah, I mean, if we
Yeah.
could look at that, that would be helpful. We may eat up all our income, and we may, when we get the final bill from across the hall, have to make some changes, but we'll look at it. Senator Bray.
Yeah, so I have to, I have a different view, and I'm just not sure. It seems sort of unnecessarily opportunistic to say, someone shows up, they buy a high-priced home, and they should pay at a higher rate. They're already buying a higher priced home. They'll be paying higher taxes. They may have a lot more maintenance and expense related to that home, improving that home, moving into that home, maintaining there's just a lot of knock-on effects, and I don't know why we want, it feels a little bit pointed and negative to say, no, well, you're doing well, so you're gonna have to amp up to a higher level. I get it on income tax, but in buying a home, I'll have to think more carefully about it, but it strikes me as, I don't know what I'd say, almost mean-spirited. I don't know why that individual gets picked on as, well, I mean, and adding the water surcharge, well, I've always been opposed to that. It's like the person who hasn't even lived here is paying to clean up the water of the people who've already been living here. But that's a fight that I haven't won.
And they had zero voice in that debate.
Yeah.
Because they're not even.
Yes,
they
and I
don't
can
even know
pour
they're
all the
buying a home.
phosphates on my lawn I want. I remember that argument, because I'm not buying the house. So, yes, that was hard fought. I think it was Senator Sorokin and I fought it on the floor, and we lost.
So are we approaching this because now we're in a mindset of we've got to find some place to raise taxes.
We,
Because they
we
came
are,
to us for a specific purpose, I think to find the revenue to do the manufactured home, and they came as a package. And now that that's gone, if we're in the mode of trying to find taxes to raise, is this the only one we can look at just because it's before us? What about the income tax?
no, we can look at all of these.
Madam Chair, what's happened with the Tax Structure Commission and the report that theoretically should have been the roadmap for us to decide a coherent, comprehensive tax policy?
Didn't happen.
I know they did a lot of work. They worked on it for 2 years. They spent $500 million that we budgeted for this.
We've done some of
Well,
the things in that report. I mean,
Trying to do more.
we're trying to do more. The whole income tax for schools was in that report. The bill that we passed, S-214, that is on the floor tomorrow, that's from that report.
Okay.
We have done some of
Have
the
done
things
some.
in that report. And you're right, we
Yeah, the
haven't,
school tax I know was in the report,
Yeah.
but there was so much more in it. And the whole issue behind it was to do something that was comprehensive instead of these little bites, every one of which, adds yet another pebble to the gravel load of tax confusion.
We're doing this now because we've had this bill
Yeah.
since last year, and we have not come to consensus. And wherever, just because the manufactured homes isn't in here, if we do it, it is an expense.
like it's in another bill, but
It's
it's
in
still
another
in the
bill, but
budget.
it is still in that room on the board, and it is an expense as, we are going to be starting to walk through the child tax credit, which will have a lot of appeal. It will help a lot of people. And then we've got a raise in the income limit to not count Social Security and pensions. That's gonna cost a lot of money, and to do that, yeah, we can look at anything. I voted twice, Senator Sirotkin, to raise the income tax to cover essential services. They were floor amendments. We can, but that's, there's also the political reality of what's likely to pass and what's not likely to pass, which is one reason that things get put together like this. I'm just trying to get a consensus or a sense as to what, when they walk across the hall and say, we need $80 million, what we have any reasonable chance of being able to raise. So I wanted to get a sense of this. The other one, I don't think there's any way we're gonna do the cloud tax this year. But the other one that was really simple, we didn't take up in 53, was the raising of the registration for,
Brokers?
mutual funds.
Yeah.
That I believe raises $6 million and probably would not be as controversial as.
I remember the last time we raised money on mutual funds, we were worried that we were raising it pretty high, a big jump, and it was. And we heard nothing from the industry. That's really surprised me.
Yeah.
We heard zero.
Well, yeah.
So that's still sitting there for us to look at. The cloud tax is obviously more controversial, harder to administer, and probably not something we could do easily. We could do it if we needed to this year.
I'm gonna ask if you can't tell this is a joke, but I was gonna say, how about break open tickets?
Yes,
Well, how
and then
about
there's
sports
Keno.
gambling?
What's that?
Sports gambling, what does that raise us?
That,
$10 million in the second year, and
What is
between
going
1 and
on?
4 million.
that was actually discussed when I talked with Jane today.
We put it on our economic development, which is a study.
It's
It's so complicated.
And zillions of states are doing it.
Yeah, I know.
including
32.
New York, and people
32.
are on.
But there's a lot of choices. You know, all the choices you made on cannabis, there's a lot of choices. And we asked for a detailed report it was due November 15th. And Tucker Anderson said, can I have a few more days? And I made the mistake of saying, yes, it's still don't have the report.
But we can always just tax them.
Well, I mean,
Yeah, it's there. And that was actually when I met with Jane this morning. One of the subjects. I mean, it is on your bill. It is a potential. The governor supports it. There's also Keno, which I don't think is.
Maybe there's a way of structuring it where we leave the
Yeah.
details for regulation to the administration, but
There is always concern
the
about
House
addiction.
has paid it, so for them to do it without any testimony, I don't know.
I mean,
well, they'll get testimony.
yeah, I mean, towards the end, we all hate some things and we all love some things and we're gonna, nobody's happy with everything, and that's usually a good way to end.
Tim Nash is here.
That's right. Rolling move.
Okay, I think we're probably done. We will do the S bills. I think we've pretty much reached consensus on those. We'll get what we can out. We've got the coyote bill, which is a fee, and we will make sure that that's on the agenda with notice, so
I missed the
get those out.
discussion on, the end of the discussion on the manufacturing tax. Was there any end to that discussion? Or-
I think we're leaning as a possibility.
How much is that? How much does that cost? us?
It's costing, that's the whole,
$900,000, I think, wasn't it?
900,000.
I wanted to ask the question, if that $900,000 came as a result of audited cases, is there any interest in adding more auditors, do more audited cases to get more return?
Well, the problem is in the audit cases, they seem to be losing
Oh,
a number.
We didn't get a number on that, we
Yeah,
asked.
we didn't.
Are we almost?
I think we are done. I think we can go offline.